Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew, and I want to welcome to the show an awesome guest, Mr. Tim Swartz. Tim is an Emmy award-winning television producer, photojournalist, author of several books. Tim, thanks for joining us tonight. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So I'd like to start with a topic that seems to be blowing up right now, the UFO phenomenon. We're seeing more of this in the mainstream now, Pentagon releasing files. What are your thoughts on this? Are we in for some kind of disclosure soon?
Oh, no, of course not. Everybody always thinks that there's going to be some kind of disclosure, or, finally the president is going to reveal that, the aliens have been here. And, it's not going to happen that way. I think that there has probably been, like a slow trickle of disclosure over the years. But nobody is going to come just right out and say that, hey, we've been lying to you all these years and UFOs are real. I think one of the reasons that, there has been this whole secrecy about UFOs is that they, the government, military, insert favorite group, here.
Yeah.
Has known that the UFOs are real, but they don't know what they are. I really doubt if there is this like vast secret knowledge about the origin of UFOs and some kind of, secret repository in Area 51 or under Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I think that they're aware that they're real, but they have no idea what they are, and they're never going to admit that, because that really would create a panic. I mean, can you imagine if people found out that our government and our military has known for years that we've got something flying around in our skies with impunity and we can do nothing to stop it? That's kind of a frightening scenario.
Yeah, it is. And on the other hand, I think a lot more people are kind of open to it now. A lot more people are becoming open to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Well, look at pop culture. Pop culture has played a really big role into putting that mindset in us. I mean, I know when I was growing up as a kid, and you as well, probably. I mean, you had these cartoons that featured aliens and I think a lot of people nowadays, especially maybe not so much baby boomers and the older generations, but the kids that came after that, I think a lot of them would be surprised if somebody says that aliens don't exist. I think a lot of people just kind of take it as a matter of fact that on the reality of extraterrestrial life. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there is this pop culture attribute to the whole reality of UFOs that's been playing for a number of years. Was that deliberate? Did somebody in power actually put that in place 50 years ago to slowly work its way, or was it just a pleasant accident? Maybe a little from column A, a little from column B.
Right. Yeah, and it seems going back, it's way to our beginnings. It used to be angels and demons, and now it's aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that these are more of interdimensional beings rather than maybe just little green men?
Possibly. I always avoid saying I believe this or I believe that, because that tends to then put you in this kind of like a headlock into a belief system where you'll then, you get so ingrained in it that you'll absolutely refuse to listen to any other kinds of explanations or new evidence. But, that has been one of my favorite theories for a long time, that we're not dealing exclusively, at least, with extraterrestrials or just simply, nuts and bolts spaceships coming from other planets. I think the UFO phenomena probably is a lot stranger than we can even conceive. It could very possibly be that, some parts of it are extraterrestrials, but I think that there's this other aspect of it that, for want of a better term, could be paranormal or interdimensional, or I don't know if we really have the words to accurately describe it. Let's just say that I think that we are dealing with some other intelligence, some other non-human intelligence that has interacted with us probably from the beginning of time. And that intelligence has taken on all kinds of different forms. Like you said, at one time we believed in angels and demons, or, fairies and leprechauns and things like that. And whatever this intelligence is, it seemed to be more than happy to take on that persona, to take on those forms. Well, now we no longer believe, or at least, most people don't believe in like angels and demons or fairies and leprechauns, but we're more than willing to believe in little gray aliens from another planet. And wow, surprisingly enough, whatever this intelligence is, it takes that form. Does it take these forms deliberately, or is there some kind of interplay, between human consciousness and whatever whatever they are? That's probably the $1 billion question there.
Yes, right. And you hear stories where, they can actually communicate through the mind and affect matter and, materialize and all these things. And based on your research, would you say that most of these encounters that people come across are more malevolent or benevolent?
Well, once again, if you go and search just entirely for, say, like, UFO hostility cases, which, by the way, that's a new book that myself and Timothy Green Beckley and Sean Castile has just put out recently, then, yeah, you're going to find just all kinds of cases that have had, not so happy run-ins with many, where people have come away with happier experiences, with feeling like that maybe that they have had a transient experience that would almost, some people would almost call it a spiritual uplifting, which you wouldn't think that astronauts, say, from another planet would be able to induce that sort of reaction to a local population of another planet, being Earth. So, it's again, we're kind of back to this: are we dealing with an intelligence that transcends time and space, or at least our own reality? But it's like you said. I mean, there are a number of really fascinating, if not downright terrifying, cases of people that have been physically harmed by UFOs, maybe accidentally coming too close to a landed craft or something like that. There have been cases, especially South America has a lot of cases where people would run across, say, like a landed UFO, and the occupants would come out and physically attack the humans close by. I mean, there was a number of cases where these things seemed to have almost like a Wolverine for the Marvel comics, where they had like a sharp, almost metallic types of claws, and just would just rip the rip the hell out of these people and leave them with just really horrendous injuries. We don't see that as much here in the United States, but especially Central South America. There's been some cases in Africa like that. They seem to be more predominant for whatever reason in those areas.
Wow, that's fascinating. And now, speaking of contact, through the ages, I have always been fascinated with the stories you hear of the Nazis having contact with off-world entities or being helped by off-world entities. Can you talk a little about that and maybe how that relates to some of the secret space program?
Mm-hmm. In the early 1900s, there was a secret society that operated in Germany and Austria, those areas, that they referred to themselves as the Vril, or the Vril Society. And this was taken from an early science fiction book that these people felt really, even though this was a novel, they felt that a lot of the aspects of this book were possibly true to life, and that they should try to emulate the characters and the philosophy that was in this book. And right now I can't remember exactly what the name of the title was. I just remember that in this book, the occupants of this land used a type of energy that they called Vril. So the Vril Society, the real Vril Society that operated in Germany, were also they employed spiritual mediums, people who, women especially, who claimed that they had the psychic abilities to talk with spirits, angels, ascended masters, whatever you would want to call them. They eventually said that they were getting communications from a race of extraterrestrials that lived in a solar system, outside within our own galaxy, but definitely not in our solar system, and that they were being channeled scientific information. Some of the scientific information, including designs to develop anti-gravity spaceships. An offshoot of the Vril Society that was called I want to say Thul. I'm never going to pronounce that correctly. Somebody who speaks German would probably have a better grasp on how the name is pronounced, but say or Tool, it may be pronounced like the Tool Society, Thule, which was a branch. It was like a schism from the Vril Society. Both of these groups claimed that they were in communication with extraterrestrials, and that they were in the process of using scientists and engineers. And this was all later brought into the Nazi Party, because the Nazis were extremely interested in occult practices. And so, with the help, supposedly, of these extraterrestrial creatures, they set about trying to actually build these spacecrafts, trying to use the technology that they had available to them at the time to see if the scientific principles, because they were dealing with things that were really, completely outside of our knowledge of physics. by this time, Einstein and a lot of other scientists had been run out of Europe because of the Nazis' practices of hatred of the Jews especially. So they were working with trying to develop a completely new type of science and physics to humans. So now the story goes that the Nazi scientists were able to take this technology and develop it quite a ways. But apparently there became a pretty intense dislike with the Vril Society and the Nazis. I guess the Vril, the women of the Vril, because it was primarily a matriarchal group. Run by women, and they became pretty disgusted with the direction that the Nazis were taking with Germany. So there's a possibility that they may have actually had fed the wrong information to these Nazi scientists, maybe enough to get some results, but not the complete results. Some of the stories have it that the Vril Society actually had their own side projects going on and built their own successful anti-gravity ships, and with the help of scientists and engineers who had the same loathing against Hitler and the Nazis, may have reached the point where they actually fled the planet. Now, this is the speculation on my part, because at some point, the Vril Society just kind of disappeared. They had played a predominant role, especially within the occult practices of the Nazi parties. There were a number of notes and paperwork back and forth between them and the Nazis, and then just all of a sudden, it just stopped. It's just like they stepped off the face of the earth. Nobody has been able to find, because, okay, naturally the first impression that you would have would be like, oh, well, the Vril probably just stepped on somebody's toes and they ended up in a concentration camp someplace. But as far as anybody has been able to find, and of course the Nazis were meticulous record keepers. So if any of these people actually ended up in a Nazi concentration camp, there is no record of it. So some have speculated that they just got fed up with people and left the planet on their own. It's a fascinating story, and every time that I go back to it and start doing some additional research, I find something new. So, I mean, this is a story that myself and Timothy Green Beckley and some others have been working on for a number of years, and the story isn't over yet, folks.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And based on your research, what have you found about maybe their involvement in Antarctica?
Well, definitely the Nazis were fascinated with Antarctica. First of all, because they saw it as a very good strategic location. I mean, if you had a base in Antarctica, you could use that for any number of countries, especially in the southern hemisphere. In the early 1930s, they actually asked Admiral Richard Byrd if he would be willing to partake in an Antarctic expedition for Germany, but he refused. Already at that time, the Nazis had a pretty bad reputation, even though the war had not started yet, even in Europe. So they had some of their own. Now, later on, in the early 1940s, Hitler became fascinated. And again, this is part of this whole occult tradition that the Nazis were embracing. But Hitler was fascinated with the idea that objects of religious power They approached that somewhat, in a fictional manner in the first Indiana Jones movie. Indiana Jones,
Right.
and the Lost Ark. Well, I mean, that was based on reality. The Nazis set out a number of different types of archaeological and historical investigations throughout the planet in search of relics that they thought possibly could hold some sort of supernatural powers that would be beneficial for Germany. They had this idea that there was a root race that at some time in prehistory was the race that developed into what they called the Aryan race, the all white race. And they thought that this race had the abilities, whether it be spiritual, supernatural, religious, what have you, that was conferred to various kinds of and I'll put quotation marks around this, holy objects. And so the Nazis wanted to try to get a hold of these holy objects because they felt that they belonged in Germany, first of all, and that when they were all brought together, that this would create, almost like a blessing from, God or the whatever. It's really hard to say anymore just exactly what kind of deities that they believed in, but they thought that these artifacts would help them somehow. And Antarctica was one of these locations that they thought could possibly either have a city or an entrance to an underground kingdom that may still have these the superior race, these lost Aryans, so to speak, Tibet, the Himalayas, Nepal. They also set expeditions to these places as well to try to find holy artifacts, or even to try to find these people who may have went underground for some reason.
Wow, and you had mentioned Admiral Byrd, and there's some fascinating stories that go with that. And for the listeners who may not be familiar, could you just briefly give us an overview of Admiral Byrd, his flight, and maybe get into his secret diary if you can?
Yeah, sure. Well, Admiral Byrd was probably one of the last great explorers. I mean, he early on, he became fascinated with both the Arctic and the Antarctic regions of the planet, and wanted to be, at that time, he wanted to be one of the first people to actually take an aircraft and fly over both the North and South poles. I mean, we're talking about the early 1900s here, and this was a feat that hadn't been accomplished at the time. So Byrd actually did claim that him and his pilot were actually able to fly over the North Pole. That claim has been disputed over the years. And I'm not going to get into that now, but history basically still has it that Byrd was able to do that. Well, after his Arctic expeditions, he set his sights on Antarctica and had a number of Antarctic expeditions that explored a lot of area that had never been seen before by people. I mean, they discovered mountain ranges and islands and just, all kinds of fascinating things. There came about, I think it probably came out in the late 1950s, this book that claimed to be Admiral Byrd's Lost Diary. And in this, it was supposedly Admiral Byrd's recollections of a flight that he had made in 1947 over the North Pole, where he was accosted, him and his pilot was accosted by UFOs that then escorted his plane into the Hollow Earth, where he met these people, the same people that the Nazis had supposedly been looking for, and was told that the Inner Earth people were watching the surface world very carefully and were extremely worried about our use of atomic weapons. Now, of course, this was 1947, and they didn't. We didn't have near the amount of atomic weapons then as we do now. And it's very interesting because this was the same types of stories that came about in the 1950s from a lot of the early UFO contactees, people like George Damsky, Howard Menger, the Space Brothers, as they were referred to, were very fixated on the development of our nuclear weapons. And they kept saying that not only could we, blow our own planet up, but it would have dire consequences for the entire solar system. The interesting thing about Admiral Byrd's diary is that the dates that he has written in this diary, that he was in, or claimed to be in the North Pole, he was actually on the opposite side of the globe in Antarctica as part of a U.S. Navy operation called Operation High Jump. Right. This took place in the winter of 1947. Well, I mean, it would have been the winter in the northern hemisphere. It was the summer in Antarctica. So the question is, was this book put out as a disinformation campaign to distract what was really going on with Operation High Jump? Because face it, I mean, the Lost Diaries of Admiral Byrd reads very much like some of these UFO contactee stories, almost absurdly so. So I've speculated that whatever reason that Operation High Jump was going on in Antarctica, somebody wanted to keep the details of that secret. And one of the best ways to do it is to put out a story that is so crazy that anything else that comes about, people are going to go, oh, now, wait a minute. Isn't this the same guy that was associated with that Lost Diaries junk?
Right.
Where he claimed that he saw, like flying saucers from the hollow earth. So, why would I believe then, whatever story that you're telling me about that happened with Operation High Jump in Antarctica? Thing about it is that we know for a fact that Operation High Jump did take place. There's actually a documentary about it that was filmed by, the military press department while it was going on. There were a lot of soldiers that were associated with Operation High Jump. Because we're talking about, this was something that had like maybe over 2,000 personnel involved, a number of ships, an aircraft carrier, even a submarine. And this took place just right after the end of World War II, when shortly before this took place, the Navy was actually decommissioning ships. They didn't need them anymore. The war was over. And then all of a sudden they just turned around and said, hey, let's get all these ships back together again and send them to Antarctica, with about 2,000 soldiers and personnel, just, I don't know, let's go see if we can make snow cones or something. It's just, they said it was they were going to look for like valuable minerals and things like that. Later, they said that it was part of a training exercise in the event that someday, say, like the Soviet Union would invade the United States, coming across, say, like Alaska and down through Canada, which a lot of people have said, well, why did you go all the way to Antarctica to do that? You could have done it right up there, in Canada. It would have been a lot closer and a lot cheaper, too. And they're like, oh, well, we just, that sort of thing. So, it leaves us with some really unusual stories about Operation High Jump, why they were there, what actually happened. They were supposed to be down there for like 6 months, but they left after about 6 weeks, claiming that the weather had gotten bad. They couldn't take it anymore, so they came home. They did go during the summer, the southern hemisphere summer, and even in the summertime, Antarctica, can not exactly a pleasant place to live, but they went there prepared for practically every aspect, but for some reason they pulled up and left early, and we don't know why, nor do we really have a good reason why they were there. All kinds of stories, secret Nazi bases, looking for that, that entrance to the hollow earth. I mean, you can insert practically every kind of crazy story that there's been around, and Operation High Jump was involved in it. Truth of the matter is that we just don't know.
Right. We don't know. And you mentioned hollow earth. And I understand you've done some interesting research into hollow earth, and that there could possibly be some connection to the JFK assassination.
Oh, I wish I could give you a better a story with that. But yeah, actually, a good friend of ours, a guy by the name of Tim Crinlin, wrote just this fascinating article in one of our books about that. And gosh, I really wish I could give you the complete details to that, but I really don't know that well. I'll give you the synopsis that that I remember that Tim had come up with. The family that Admiral Byrd belonged to, was also involved. Let me see if I can remember this correctly. They were the owners of the book depository in Houston or Dallas. In Dallas. And that they, not only were they involved in that, but they were also involved with the oil companies that Lyndon Johnson was involved with. And there was just some very interesting political shenanigans, for want of a better word, that Admiral Byrd was related to the owners of the book depository, and some suspicious money's being sent back and forth shortly before JFK's assassination to other people who seem to have had some kind of involvement with this assassination. And like I said, I'm giving you this explanation from Tim Crinlin's article. Really, goes into it a lot deeper than I do. But it just it just seems like that there is this interesting cast of characters involved in the sidelines with the whole JFK assassination that kind of directly leads back to Admiral Byrd's financing, especially his later financing, when it came to some of his later expeditions to Antarctica. One of the interesting parts of the story is that Admiral Byrd's son had came out and had actually had publicly said that he was going to look into whether or not the groups of people, these oil tycoons, who helped finance his father's expedition, whether or not they were actually also financing some of these groups that may have had a vested interest in having JFK assassinated. Well, when Admiral Byrd's son, he was going to go to a convention, and he got onto a train and vanished. And a couple of weeks later, he was found dead in a warehouse somewhere. No physical, wasn't shot, wasn't, stabbed or anything like that. He was just found dead in a warehouse that he shouldn't be there, and, and it's just one of these mysteries that seem to surround players of the JFK assassination. Somebody will come forward and say, there could be something going on here, and then they're dead.
Right.
So, like I said, Tim Crinlin has done some really excellent research on this story, and really can give it to you better than I can. That's kind of the Reader's Digest version.
Right. Okay, well, that's very interesting, very fascinating stuff. I mean, the connections you get from some of these things. And for the second half of my show, I wanted to get into something that I'm also fascinated with, Nikola Tesla. Mm-hmm. Now, there's so many mysteries surrounding him, so many fascinating stories. I'd like to get into maybe some of the lesser-known stuff and what happened to his works. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Nikola Tesla. Yeah, this was a gentleman that I've been fascinated with for years and years. When I grew up, when I was going to school, they never taught me about Nikola Tesla. Everything, especially having to do with electricity here in the United States, that was all Thomas Edison. Not only did Thomas Edison invent the light bulb, but boy, I mean, he invented electricity, and invented the whole grid system to get the electricity to you. And there was absolutely no mention of Nikola Tesla at all. And in fact, the first time that I think I ever heard about Nikola Tesla was when I was worked at a television station in Dayton, Ohio, and one of the things that we did, every couple of weeks, is that we'd go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was close by, and we'd meet with the liaison there, and they would provide us, with some kind of interesting story that we could do. And one day we were sitting there, and he was going through his files, trying to find something for us that we could do a story on. And he just made this offhanded remark. We said, we're working on some stuff from that mad scientist Tesla, but I can't really talk about that now. And then he went on to something else, and that name stuck with me. That mad scientist Tesla. Who's that? Right. Never heard of him before. So, using the resources that I had available to me at the time, stuff like the Lexus Nexus, which was really only available to reporters, and libraries and universities, things like that, I was able to finally track down who Nikola Tesla was, and ran across some of his biographies that people like Margaret Cheney, people like that had written. And boy, that just became like this lifelong journey for me, learning more about this absolutely fantastic guy who was the inventor of the AC induction motor. He invented and created our entire electrical grid system that we still use in the United States. It hasn't changed that much. Radio. You can really thank Nikola Tesla for radio. Everyone is, oh, well, it was Marconi. No, Marconi was actually using Tesla's patents for radio to make his devices work. Cell phones, robotics, remote controls, the list goes on and on and on. The things that this guy in the late 19th and early 20th century worked on, invented, got patents on them. I mean, you could go as far as, he worked on something that he called the death beam, which we would now call a particle beam weapon. And he was working on this in the early 20th century and made his announcement about it in the early 1930s. But this was something that, I mean, it was so far ahead of its time that it wasn't until probably like the 1980s that the military was even coming close to getting a handle on what he was thinking about. One of Tesla's big dreams was the wireless distribution of electricity. He figured out that using both the atmosphere and the ground, that you could send electricity to practically any point on the planet, with the help of other transmitters along the way, without wires. If he had been able to finish his work, we'd be able to be sitting in our house and enjoy electricity, but it would be getting to our houses without wires. That was his really big dream. And then there was like 1,000 other things in between that Tesla was interested in and worked on.
And I understand he may have had an accidental brush with time travel.
Yeah, when he was working in his laboratory in Manhattan, and this was before, this would have been, I think, around 1896, 97, maybe. I'll have to go back and look at this. It was before his Manhattan laboratory burnt down. He was working with his Tesla coil, trying to produce. Well, he wasn't trying; he was actually producing rotating electromagnetic fields. And he reached over to grab something, and the Tesla coil arced. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a Tesla coil operate, but it's constantly throwing off like bolts of electricity, and they usually don't travel very far, but every once in a while, especially if you'll get an arc that'll travel quite a distance. And that's what happened to Tesla. Tesla got hit by one of these bolts associated with these rotating electromagnetic fields. And so Tesla found himself then, as he described it, he said that he felt that he had been transported outside of time and space. Now, he was still in the laboratory. I mean, it wasn't a situation where like he disappeared and then reappeared again, because he had, his assistants were right there and they saw the entire process. But to his perception, he felt like time had disappeared for him, and that he could see, as he described it, the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. And that it actually later in life, I mean, it gave him some really interesting ideas on how to develop his own unified field theory. But in that, it was just kind of like an instant, almost just a blink of an eye. He felt that that time was not a real thing, at least not as we perceive time, and that by being outside of time and space, he could see the entire face of reality before him. Now, if his assistant actually hadn't grabbed a 2x4 and knocked him out of this arc of electricity, Tesla probably would have died eventually. Even he was pretty well grounded, but he was caught and paralyzed, and eventually it just he just would have fried.
Wow.
You stay in a field of energy that long, you'd fry. So his assistant, who was smart enough to know not to try to grab him himself, because then the electricity would catch him up as well, took a board, a 2x4 board, and hit him as hard as he could and knocked him out of this field of electricity. So Tesla, for the rest of his life, kind of took it upon himself. He developed an interest in cosmology after that point, and really worked hard to develop his theories on how the universe worked. And this really stemmed from this one accident, and how he said that he felt, or how he saw the universe when he was in this field of electricity. And it's just, it's really a fascinating story. And like I said, later in life, it gives you some really good ideas on where he was trying to go with his idea on how gravity worked, how the universe worked, on not only large scales, but on a microscopic, what we now call the quantum level. Tesla was working on this, up until the time that he died. He actually apparently had written quite a bit of this down because he made references to it in a number of magazine articles. Unfortunately, this amazing work that he was doing has never surfaced. I don't know, if it was in, like all of these trunks and belongings that he had that were confiscated by the government when he passed away, or what. We really don't know.
Yeah, and it just leaves speculation on what could his files and his works be possibly being used for now. I mean, most likely something clandestine, or deep state, you would say, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If the FBI released starting in 2013, started releasing the files that they had on Tesla. They released the last bits in 2016. And a majority of these files really are nothing more than letters that various people, scientists, even a general from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 80s had written to the FBI. Journals were that they had heard that the FBI had seized them when he had died, and they wanted to know, where this material was. Well, the FBI, even though that they had initially been involved, all of Tesla's works were actually collected by the Office of Alien Property, which is rather unusual because Tesla had been a naturalized American citizen for a number of years. But still, for whatever reason, the OAP were the ones, possibly with the help of the OSS, the early version of the CIA, to grab whatever material of Tesla's that they could get a hold of, and then hold it for a number of years. A lot of it was sent to places like Wright-Patterson. DARPA got a hold of a lot of it. And then eventually the material was released to Tesla's nephew, who was a Yugoslavian diplomat. And it was sent then to Yugoslavia, where it was part of the Tesla Museum that is now in Belgrade. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of this material that is being held in Belgrade they've never allowed Western scientists or journalists or really anybody who's interested from the United States to look at this stuff. Probably the Soviet Union had access to it. A lot. We have some really good evidence that the Soviets were able to develop some interesting weapons based on Tesla's ideas, and probably from these notes. I sincerely doubt, though, that the United States would have been dumb enough to release everything to Yugoslavia. More than likely, they made copies, or even retained material that they felt that was too sensitive to release to the Soviet Union. Somehow, though, a lot of this material did make it to them because we've had reports that the Soviets had developed what we would call, say, like a Tesla shield, which would be really almost like a dome of energy that could be placed over a strategic area, a city, a missile base, or something like that, that would prevent aircraft, missiles, bombs from penetrating it. They also had a working version of the Tesla's death beam. There was a satellite photograph taken of a base in Siberia that I think this was released by Jane's Technology, a drawing of this picture that was taken, and for all intents and purposes, it is a Tesla-based particle beam weapon. Now, did the United States manage to build the same thing at some point? Who knows? I mean, we know a lot more about what the Soviets were able to do than what our own military was able to accomplish. But I dare say that if the Soviets were able to do it, then the United States probably were able to do it as well.
Right. Well, speaking of clandestine operations and operations that we're not told about, we have time for one more thing. I'd like to ask you some of the theories that you might have heard or come across about HAARP.
Oh, sure. Well, HAARP hasn't been in the news too much recently. They've claimed that we've shut it down, and we're not interested in doing anything with it anymore. But the people who monitor the frequencies that HAARP broadcast on says that this isn't true. That HAARP is still in operation, but HAARP was this interesting built up in Australia, up in Alaska.
Yeah,
yeah, completely different continent there. But anyway, it was built up in Alaska for nobody really knows for sure what it was built for. Okay, it as the paperwork that was used the blueprints to build this array of antennas with really powerful radio transmitters, said that this was research into atmospheric heating, that if you could concentrate various radio frequencies at certain spots of the atmosphere, what would happen? Could you affect the weather? Could you use it to, say, communicate with submarines deep under the ocean? Could you use it to knock down missiles with? The scientist who first patented the idea of HAARP, and I should add, he used his patent based on Tesla's idea for the wireless transmission of electricity. His idea was that you would take this array and you would build it near the Alaskan oil fields because it was expensive and possibly environmentally unsound to use a pipeline to pipe this oil clear across Canada or wherever. His idea was that you burn the oil right there, generate electricity from it, and then you could transmit it using the HAARP array to any place on the planet. And, here would be this great abundant source of electricity that made from the burning of oil right there at the oil fields. But once various other corporations bought each other out, the military ended up with these designs, and then you had this array just really basically like the original patent, but nobody really offered any good explanation on just exactly what they were doing with it. And so then you had a lot of people speculating endlessly on what they were doing with it. and again, it's kind of these situations where, ham operators, amateur radio operators who monitor the frequencies that HAARP operates on, they're like, we have no idea what they're doing, with this. Some of these frequencies could almost be used for mind control. The CIA MK Ultra experiments in the 50s, 60s, and 70s specified that there were certain radio frequencies that seemed to have a resonant quality with the human brain, and that under the right conditions, you could broadcast these radio frequencies, say, at a city or a town, and you could have all kinds of dangerous effects on the population. You could actually get them to commit, say, like mass suicide, or maybe broadcast a command to them to get your guns and go out and start shooting each other, or things like that. Recently, there's been these stories that have come out of Cuba.
And China as well.
Yeah, China as well. Right. Where they claimed that they were being hit with sonic weapons of some kind. No, those aren't sonic weapons. Those are radio frequency weapons that when people are hit with these things, with these electromagnetic beams, it produces your brain interprets it as a sound. So that's why these people are saying that they're hearing things, and why, the press is saying, well, maybe they're trying sonic weapons. No, they're Tesla-based electromagnetic weapons, possibly, for who knows? Russia was doing the same thing to the American embassy in Moscow in the 1970s. They were beaming microwaves, of various frequencies at this embassy, and this stuff sounds suspiciously similar to what they were doing, same frequencies on some of their experiments as well.
Yeah, that's crazy stuff. I mean, to the thought of the kinds of weapons and technology that they have that we'll never know about, but that they could be possibly using on us right now. It's fascinating and frightening thought at the same time.
Oh yeah, well, in the 1980s, there were a number of protests taking place in Great Britain about the stockpile of nuclear weapons that the United States was keeping stored at various bases there in Great Britain. A number of protesters claimed that they were being hit by some kind of radio, electromagnetic weapons that created all kinds of health effects, on them. I mean, some of them just had nosebleeds and headaches. Others had brain hemorrhages. Others had just really severe depressive episodes. There was just this whole range of really interesting physical and mental effects that took place that sounded suspiciously like the very same stuff that the CIA and the military were experimenting on under MK Ultra and and some of these other types of we don't know their names at this point. Again, all this goes back to the experiments that Tesla was doing, and I'm sure, God, poor guy, I mean, he would just be aghast to know that people were using his ideas for these kind of weaponries. But this was stuff that Tesla was working on in the early years of the 20th century. And, and we're now just barely understanding the stuff that he was doing that far back.
Yeah. And, well, we are living in fascinating times right now, and there is so much happening. And, Tim, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. That was some awesome information, and we'd love to have you back on sometime. And before you go, if there's anything upcoming you'd like to tell us about, anything you got going on?
Oh, sure. Well, if you want to find out more about me, you can just go to our website. It's conspiracyjournal.com. We put out a free weekly email newsletter. Just sign up, give us your email address. We don't spam you. We don't give it to anybody else. You just get our newsletter from it. Any of our books, any of my books, Tim Swartz, Timothy Green Beckley, all available on Amazon.com. I think we have I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 books out right now. I'm not sure. I've lost track. Yeah, we've got a lot. But yeah, any of this stuff. If you're interested in it, just check out Conspiracy Journal. Check out our books. Something for everybody.
Yep, and I'm going to leave the links to all those in the description. Thanks again, Tim, and we will see you again soon. And good night, everyone.